The soup didn't spill. It was guided. In a dining room full of witnesses, Lucas tilted the bowl just enough. Steam rose. Then it landed across Aubrey's wrist, her collarbone. Skin flushed instantly. No one moved. Jonathan did. "You startled him," he said, calm, certain. "Why would you do that?" Aubrey didn't answer. She stood there, burned corrected, and quietly rewritten in front of everyone. Across the table, eyes shifted, but no one spoke. And then the doorbell rang. Sharp, untimely. Not for her. But it would change everything. If you believe truth has a way of surfacing slowly but without mercy, stay with this story. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Stories land differently depending on where we sit in the world. And if you value quiet strength over loud reactions, consider subscribing. Not for drama, but for what comes after it. The house on Alder Ridge Drive had the kind of symmetry that reassured people. Even the neighbors who barely knew the Reeds would describe it the same way: well-kept, balanced, respectable. The lawn was trimmed on schedule. The porch light came on at dusk without fail. From the outside, it held its shape. Inside it, functioned just as precisely. But not evenly. Aubrey Reed had learned the rhythm of the house long before she understood her place in it. She moved through it quietly, not out of fear, but out of clarity. There was a difference. Fear reacted. Clarity observed. She noticed which cabinet doors Jonathan preferred slightly ajar, which invoices he left face down on the kitchen counter, which conversations ended when she entered a room. None of it was dramatic. That was the design. Jonathan Reed was the kind of man who never raised his voice in public because he never needed to. His authority came in quieter forms, timing omission correction. At neighborhood gatherings, he was attentive. He remembered names asked about promotions, sent follow-up emails that made people feel seen. He donated to local fundraisers. He shook hands firmly, smiled easily. At home, his tone remained calm. That was what made it effective. Aubrey, he would say, not loudly, not sharply, but with a small pause afterward that required adjustment. That's not quite how it happened. Or, let me clarify that. He didn't contradict her outright. He repositioned her. Over time, those small corrections accumulated. Not enough for confrontation, just enough for redefinition. Lucas Reed had been watching this longer than anyone realized. At 14, he had already learned that power did not always announce itself. Sometimes it redirected, sometimes it waited until the room was quiet. Lucas had his father's stillness, but not yet his discipline. His reactions came faster, less refined. Where Jonathan adjusted narratives, Lucas tested boundaries. It began with small things. A chair pulled back just as Aubrey reached for it. A question asked with a tone that wasn't quite respectful, not quite rude. A glance toward Jonathan after each moment, measuring the response. Jonathan rarely intervened. Not because he didn't notice, because he did. Aubrey understood this pattern before she gave it a name. She recognized it in the pauses, in the non-corrections, in the way certain behaviors were allowed to repeat. She did not confront Lucas. She did not correct Jonathan. Instead, she began to keep track. It started simply. An email forwarded to a private account. A receipt photographed before being filed. A note written in her phone, not emotional, not interpretive. Just factual. March 3rd, kitchen. Lucas removed plate. No response from Jonathan. March 11th, bank alert. Transfer not discussed. There was no urgency in it. No plan yet. Just accumulation. The house made that possible. It was large enough for distance, but structured enough that patterns repeated. Morning routines aligned. Evenings returned to the same spaces: the kitchen island, the dining table, the hallway outside Jonathan's study. Jonathan's study remained the only room that resisted Aubrey's presence. Not explicitly. There was no rule against entering, no locked door. But the air changed when she stepped inside. Papers shifted, conversations ended, screens dimmed slightly faster than necessary. You need something, Jonathan would ask always with a polite neutrality. It was not a question designed for an answer. So Aubrey learned to stand at the threshold. From there, she observed enough. Folders labeled with property addresses, not all of them familiar. Envelopes marked confidential. A second phone, once placed, screened down near the edge of the desk. She did not touch any of it. Not because she was uninterested, because she was not ready. Jonathan managed finances with the same quiet authority he applied to conversation. Accounts existed, but not all were shared. Decisions were explained, but not always in advance. It's simpler this way, he had said early in the marriage. Less for you to worry about. At the time, it had sounded like care. Over time, it became structure. Aubrey retained access to household expenses, groceries, utilities, maintenance, everything that kept the house functioning. But the broader picture, the investments, the transfers, the long-term decisions remained partially obscured. Not hidden, just incomplete. Lucas absorbed this division without being told. He knew which questions to ask his father and which ones to direct toward Aubrey. He knew which answers mattered. Dad said we might get a new place, Lucas mentioned once casually as he scrolled through his phone at the kitchen counter. Aubrey looked up from the sink. Did he? Lucas shrugged. He said it depends. On what? Another shrug. Didn't say. He didn't need to. The conversation ended there. Later that evening, Aubrey noted it. April 2nd. Lucas mentioned property discussion. Not previously raised. No confrontation followed. No inquiry directed at Jonathan. Instead, Aubrey watched. Days passed with their usual precision. Morning coffee, work schedules, evenings that looked from the outside like routine. But beneath it, something was aligning. Jonathan had become slightly more attentive in recent weeks. Not warmer, just more present at specific moments. He checked his phone more frequently during dinner. Took calls in the hallway rather than his study. Closed certain tabs quickly when Aubrey entered the room. Small deviations. Noticeable only if one had already been paying attention. Lucas mirrored that shift in a different way. He became sharper, more deliberate. His comments landed closer to edges. You always do it like that, he asked one evening as Aubrey set the table. Like what that? He gestured vaguely. Too careful. Jonathan didn't look up from his phone. Aubrey placed the last fork beside the plate. It works. Lucas held her gaze a moment longer than necessary, then looked away. That was how most interactions ended, not with resolution, but with measurement. The house recorded all of it in its own way. The creak of the third stair Lucas avoided when he didn't want to be heard. The faint click of Jonathan's study door when it closed fully. The soft notification sound from Aubrey's phone as another note was saved. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would justify alarm, but enough to form a pattern. On the evening of the dinner, the pattern held. Aubrey moved through the kitchen with her usual precision. Ingredients laid out in order. Timing adjusted so everything would be ready at once. She checked the oven temperature twice, not out of uncertainty, but habit. Jonathan entered briefly, straightening his cuff. They'll be here in 20, he said. I know. A pause. Let's keep it relaxed tonight. It sounded like a suggestion. It was not. Aubrey nodded once. Lucas passed through the kitchen without stopping, glancing at the stovetop. What's that? He asked. Soup, Aubrey said. He leaned slightly closer, watching the surface ripple. Looks hot. It is. Another pause. Lucas smiled, not broadly, not kindly, just enough to register. Then he left the room. Jonathan watched him go, then turned back to Aubrey. Don't overdo it, he said, gesturing lightly toward the counter. Simple is fine. Aubrey wiped her hands on a towel. It's already done. Jonathan nodded as if that confirmed something. Good. He left without another word. Aubrey stood in the kitchen a moment longer after he was gone. The house was quiet in that particular way it had before something shifted. Not tense, not loud, just aligned. She reached for her phone, unlocked it, and opened a note. For a second, she didn't type. Then dinner. Guests arriving. Atmosphere controlled. She saved it. Across the room, the soup continued to simmer, steam rising steadily, predictably. It would not remain contained for long. The first thing Marissa Cole noticed when she stepped into the Reed house was the quiet. Not the comfortable kind. Not the kind that settles naturally between people who know each other well. This quiet had edges. It held. "Everything smells amazing," she said, offering a practiced smile as she handed over a bottle of wine. Aubrey accepted it with both hands. "Thank you for coming." Behind Marissa, Daniel Cole gave a polite nod, scanning the entryway as if mapping it. He was the kind of man who noticed structure before sentiment. Jonathan appeared just then, timing intact. "Marissa, Daniel," he greeted, stepping forward with easy confidence. "Glad you could make it." Handshakes were exchanged, coats were taken. The choreography was smooth. Lucas lingered near the hallway, not quite part of the welcome, not quite removed from it. He watched the interaction the way one watches something predictable, waiting for deviation. "Hey," Marissa said gently to him. "You've gotten taller." Lucas shrugged. "People say that." His tone was flat but not rude, just uninvested. Jonathan placed a light hand on Lucas's shoulder, not firm, not guiding. Just there. "Go ahead, set the table," he said. Lucas didn't move immediately. Then he did. Aubrey had already prepared most of the meal. The table was nearly complete, plates, aligned utensils placed with quiet precision. Lucas adjusted one fork unnecessarily, then another, his movements just slightly off rhythm. From the kitchen, Aubrey watched without appearing to. Daniel leaned closer to Jonathan. "Place looks great." Jonathan smiled. Aubrey has an eye for it. It sounded like praise. It landed like ownership. They moved into the dining room together. Chairs pulled back, glasses filled. The conversation began easily enough. Work updates, neighborhood developments, a recent renovation project Jonathan referenced with casual authority. Aubrey contributed when addressed. Her tone remained, even her words measured. She didn't interrupt. She didn't fill silence unnecessarily. Marissa noticed that. She also noticed how often Jonathan redirected. "Aubrey handles the details," he said at one point, gesturing lightly toward the table. "I focus on the bigger picture." Daniel nodded, as if that division made sense. Lucas sat across from Aubrey, his posture relaxed, but his attention fixed. He wasn't listening to the conversation. He was watching her. The soup was served first. Aubrey carried the pot from the kitchen, carefully placing it on a trivet at the center of the table. Steam rose in steady curls, catching the light above. "It's hot," she said, not as a warning, but as fact. "I'll take some," Marissa said. Aubrey nodded and reached for the ladle. Lucas moved before she could. "I got it," he said, standing halfway, already reaching. Jonathan glanced up briefly, then back to his glass. "Careful," Aubrey said. Lucas's hand paused over the pot, then continued. He dipped the ladle, filled it, and poured into Marissa's bowl. The motion was controlled. Intentional. "Thanks," Marissa said. Lucas didn't respond. He turned next toward Aubrey. There was a moment, small, nearly invisible, where everything aligned. The angle of his wrist, the distance between bowl and table, the way his eyes flicked not to the bowl but to her face. The narrator understood before anyone else did. This was not a loss of grip, not a slip. Lucas tilted the bowl, just enough. The liquid shifted, then spilled not downward, but outward, across Aubrey's wrist, up along the inside of her forearm. A sharp line of heat that climbed toward her collarbone as she instinctively leaned back too late. The sound came after, not a scream, not even a gasp. Just the soft, involuntary intake of breath when the body registers pain before language. The room paused. Steam lingered in the air, rising from both the bowl and her skin. Aubrey's hand remained where it had been, fingers slightly curled, as if holding onto something that had already gone. Her skin flushed almost immediately. Red, then deeper. Lucas set the bowl down. Carefully, deliberately. "I didn't," he began. But he didn't finish. Jonathan spoke first. "You startled him." The sentence landed cleanly. No hesitation, no inquiry. Aubrey turned her head slightly. "Did I?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, not defensive, not accusatory, just present. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, expression composed. "You moved too quickly," he said. He was trying to help. Lucas looked at him, then back at Aubrey. The room adjusted around that explanation. Marissa's smile faltered. Daniel shifted in his seat. It looked Marissa started and then stopped. No one completed her sentence. Aubrey lowered her hand slowly, the movement controlled despite the pain that still pulsed beneath her skin. "It's fine," she said. The words were automatic. They always were. Jonathan nodded as if resolution had been reached. "Let's not make it a bigger thing than it is," he added. The phrasing was careful. It defined the scale before anyone else could. Aubrey stood. "I'll get something for it," she said. No one stopped her. Not because they didn't notice. Because the moment had already been named. And in that naming, it had been contained. She walked back into the kitchen, each step measured. Behind her, the conversation attempted to resume. "So," Jonathan said lightly, lifting his glass. "As I was saying, but the rhythm had changed." Marissa glanced toward the kitchen, then back at Daniel. He gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head. Not disagreement. Recognition. Lucas remained standing for a moment longer than necessary. Then he sat. His eyes lingered on the doorway Aubrey had disappeared through. The kitchen light caught the edge of the counter, illuminating the space where she had been moments before. Inside, Aubrey turned on the cold water. She held her wrist beneath it, the initial shock giving way to a steadier, deeper burn. She did not rush, did not panic. She watched the water move over her skin, noting the exact areas affected. Wrist, forearm, a small line near the collarbone where the liquid had reached before cooling. She reached for a towel, pressed it gently against the surface, then paused. Her gaze shifted slightly to the edge of the counter. Her phone lay there, screen dark. For a moment, she did nothing. Then she picked it up, unlocked it, and opened the camera. One photo, then another, close enough to document, not dramatic. She set the phone down, then opened her notes. Her fingers hovered briefly before typing. Dinner. Witnesses present. Lucas poured. Direction intentional. Jonathan response immediate assigned fault. She stopped, listened. From the dining room, Jonathan's voice carried faintly. Controlled, even. Reframing. Aubrey saved the note, turned off the water, and stood there a moment longer than necessary, not because she needed time, but because she understood something clearly now that had only been forming before. This had not escalated. It had revealed. And in the other room beneath the resumed conversation, something else had shifted too, not loudly, not visibly, but enough. By the time Aubrey returned from the kitchen, the dinner table had rearranged itself around the lie. Not physically. The plates were still where they had been. The soup still steamed at the center of the table. Marissa still sat with her napkin folded across her lap. Daniel with one hand near his glass, Lucas across from Aubrey with his shoulders squared just enough to suggest innocence rather than ease. But the room had already accepted Jonathan's version of events as the official one. That was how it always worked, not through force, through speed. Jonathan looked up as Aubrey resumed her seat. His expression was calm, almost patient, as if he had been waiting for her to rejoin the evening after an unnecessary interruption. "You all right?" he asked. The question arrived too late to be real. Aubrey settled her hand in her lap, careful not to let the fabric brush the tender skin along her wrist. "I'm fine." Jonathan gave a slight nod. "Good." Then he turned back to Daniel, as if care had been shown, as if the matter had been addressed. Across the table, Lucas kept his eyes on his plate. But not out of shame, not yet. He was listening, testing whether the room would hold the version his father had chosen for it. Marissa tried once to restore a normal tone. "So, Aubrey," she said gently, "have you been working on that garden space you mentioned?" Aubrey looked at her. Marissa's face carried the strained kindness of someone who had seen something she did not want to name in another person's home. "A little," Aubrey said. mostly just clearing what was overgrown. That sounds nice, Marissa replied. Jonathan smiled faintly. Aubrey has a habit of taking on projects that don't really need doing. The sentence landed with the polished weight of a joke, light enough to pass, sharp enough to place. Daniel gave a small smile because it seemed socially required. Marissa did not. Aubrey heard the sentence the way she heard all of Jonathan's remarks now, as part of a larger architecture. Every correction, every small public diminishment, every gentle redirection existed to establish ratio. He large, she smaller. His interpretation central, hers supplementary. The dinner continued in pieces. Jonathan discussed a zoning issue involving one of his commercial properties. Daniel asked about timelines. Marissa spoke about a board election at the Community Arts Center. Lucas contributed little, but his silence no longer felt adolescent. It felt attentive. Aubrey ate almost nothing, not because of the pain, because she was measuring the room. Daniel's discomfort had deepened. He was careful not to look at Aubrey too directly, perhaps out of politeness, perhaps because looking would require a decision. Marissa's gaze kept drifting toward Aubrey's wrist. Jonathan noticed this and shifted the conversation each time before the attention could settle. The mechanism was familiar to Aubrey now. Anticipate, redirect, define. Then the doorbell rang. It cut through the dining room with a sound so abrupt that everyone looked up at once. Not a timid press, not the casual double chime of a late neighbor dropping something off. It was firm, singular, precise. Jonathan's hand stopped midway to his glass. No one would have caught the pause if they had not been watching him carefully. It lasted less than a second, but it existed. Lucas looked toward the front hall with immediate alertness. Marissa blinked. Daniel's brows lifted slightly. Jonathan recovered first. "Were you expecting someone?" Marissa asked. "No," Jonathan said, too quickly. Aubrey noticed the way he set down his glass, not hard enough to sound irritated, too controlled to be casual. The bell rang again. Jonathan stood this time. "Excuse me." He left the dining room with measured steps that almost concealed the acceleration beneath them. Aubrey watched him disappear into the front hall, then turned her attention not to the doorway, but to Lucas. His posture had changed. He was no longer pretending indifference. He sat straight, her eyes fixed on the hall jaw set in that particular way children developed when adult certainty suddenly wavered in front of them. Marissa folded and unfolded the corner of her napkin. "Maybe someone has the wrong house," she said softly. Daniel didn't answer. From the dining room, they could not see the front door, only the widening slice of hallway light and the shadow movement against the wall. Then came the murmur of voices. One belonged to Jonathan. The other was male, steady and unfamiliar. Aubrey rose from her chair without announcing that she was doing it. She did not move toward the front. She moved just enough to stand where the hallway became partially visible through the dining room archway. Jonathan stood at the open door, one hand braced against the frame. On the porch was a man in a dark jacket holding a large envelope and a clipboard folder. Mid-30s, maybe early 40s. Clean-shaven, professional. Not aggressive, not apologetic. The man spoke clearly enough for Aubrey to catch only fragments. "Mr. Jonathan Reed," Jonathan's answer was lower. "What is this regarding service?" That one word changed the air. Jonathan shifted his body instinctively, angling himself to block the interior view. But the movement came too late. Aubrey saw his right hand take the envelope, saw the small tightening at the corner of his mouth, saw more telling than anything else, the break in his expression, not anger first, but calculation interrupted. The man at the door, Evan Brooks, as Aubrey would later learn from the card clipped to his folder, pointed to the signature line. Jonathan did not take the pen immediately. Now Jonathan asked, "Yes, sir." Nothing in the man's tone was hostile, which made it worse. Jonathan signed. When he handed the clipboard back, Aubrey noticed something else. A faint tremor in his fingers. Brief, suppressed, but visible. The door closed. Jonathan remained standing there for one beat too long, not reading the papers yet, not returning, just standing. Then he opened the envelope. Even from the dining room, Aubrey could see the first page was legal in tone, before it was legal in meaning dense paragraphs, numbered sections, the impersonal authority of formal language. Jonathan read the first lines, then the second page. His shoulders tightened. In the dining room, no one spoke. Lucas got up from his chair as if pulled upward by a wire. Dad Jonathan turned too sharply. "Sit down." The force in his voice arrived before the volume. It was not loud. It was worse than loud. Lucas stopped. Marissa looked down. Daniel's face had gone still in the way some men's faces did when they understood they were in the presence of something private enough to be alarming and public enough to be undeniable. Jonathan folded the papers once, then once more. Too carefully. When he re-entered the dining room, the practiced version of himself had returned, but incompletely. It was there in structure, not in ease. "Everything all right?" Daniel asked. Jonathan gave a short laugh that did not survive the air. "Just a procedural issue." "What kind of issue?" Marissa asked, before she could stop herself. Jonathan turned to her with a smile so polished it nearly restored the room. "Nearly. Nothing that concerns tonight." But Aubrey had already seen enough to know that was untrue. Not because she recognized the documents. Because she recognized Jonathan's fear. He never feared embarrassment. He managed embarrassment. He could absorb a social inconvenience, a delayed payment, a scheduling conflict, a disagreement among colleagues. This was different. This was the fear of interruption, of sequence broken, of something arriving before he had prepared the room for it. He tucked the folded papers beneath a slim stack of mail on the sideboard near the dining room entrance, a movement so quick most people would have forgotten it instantly. Aubrey did not. Neither she noticed, did Lucas. The boy sat down slowly, but his eyes followed the documents. There it was again, that first fracture in certainty. Not remorse, not yet, but destabilization. Jonathan resumed his seat. "My apologies," he said. "Where were we?" No one answered immediately. The question itself exposed too much. Everyone in the room knew exactly where they had been sitting at a table, where a woman had been burned blamed, and then interrupted by something at the front door that clearly mattered more to the man controlling the evening than he wanted them to know. But social life in quiet neighborhoods often depended on collective refusal. People learned to help one another keep surfaces intact. Daniel cleared his throat. "You were saying something about the property line issue?" Jonathan nodded. "Right." He began speaking again, but the cadence was off now. Half a beat too fast, details arriving in the wrong order. Daniel followed politely. Marissa no longer pretended interest. Lucas said nothing at all. Aubrey returned to her chair and sat with both hands in her lap. The pain in her wrist had settled into a deeper throb. The skin would mark. She knew that already. But the burn no longer felt like the center of the evening. The narrator, who knew more than any of them, understood this. Was the first true interruption Jonathan had faced in a sights in years, an intrusion from outside the house. From systems he could not soften with tone or rearrange with timing. Aubrey did not yet know the full meaning of the papers on the sideboard. She did not know which accounts had drawn attention, or how long certain transfers had been under review, or which names would eventually appear in filings and records and sworn statements. But she knew this much. The doorbell had not rung for her. It had rung for him. And for the first time in a long time, the house had admitted something from outside that Jonathan could not immediately control. Aubrey glanced once toward the folded documents near the mail stack, then back at her plate. The dinner resumed in fragments. Conversation moved. Cutlery touched china. Marissa said something kind, but distracted. Daniel answered in short phrases. Jonathan kept speaking, because silence would have meant surrender. But beneath all of it, Aubrey felt the structure shift. Not collapse, not yet. Just reveal where the weight had been hidden. And once seen weight could be measured. The guests left earlier than expected. Not abruptly, not in a way that would require explanation. But the evening shortened itself, as if the house had quietly agreed it could no longer hold the shape Jonathan had prepared for it. Marissa thanked Aubrey at the door with a softness that lingered a second too long. "Take care," she said, her eyes briefly dropping to Aubrey's wrist before returning to her face. Daniel shook Jonathan's hand again, firm but distracted. "We'll talk," he added, though neither of them clarified about what. Jonathan nodded. Of course. The door closed. The silence that followed was not the same as before. It was heavier now, not sharp, settled. Lucas disappeared down the hallway without being told. No goodnight, no comment, just absence. Jonathan remained in the entryway for a moment, his back to Aubrey, one hand resting lightly against the door, as if confirming it was fully shut. Then he turned. "Well," he said, exhaling through a small smile, "that was eventful." The word was misplaced. Too light for what had occurred. Too deliberate to be accidental. Aubrey did not respond. She moved past him toward the kitchen, gathering plates from the table one at a time. The motions were steady, unhurried. Nothing clattered, nothing broke. Jonathan followed after a few seconds. "You didn't need to leave the table like that," he said, leaning lightly against the counter as Aubrey rinsed a dish. Aubrey kept her gaze on the sink. "I needed to run water over the burn." "It wasn't that bad," Jonathan replied. The sentence came easily. It had already been practiced in his mind. Aubrey set the plate aside and reached for another. "It was enough," she said. Jonathan watched her for a moment, then pushed off the counter and moved toward the sideboard in the dining room. Aubrey heard the faint shift of paper. He had gone back for the documents. Of course he had. She did not turn to look. Behind her, the sound of unfolding pages. A pause, then a second longer pause. Jonathan read in silence this time. No performance. No attempt to control how it might sound to anyone else. Aubrey rinsed another plate, then set it in the drying rack. The water ran continuously, a soft, neutral sound that filled the space without interrupting thought. She did not ask what the papers said. She did not need to. Questions would invite answers. Answers would invite narrative. And narrative in Jonathan's hands was always an instrument. Instead, she reached for her phone again, unlocked it, opened the camera. She stepped slightly to the side, angling her wrist under the kitchen light. The redness had deepened. A clear boundary marked where the liquid had made contact. Small raised areas beginning to form. She took 3 photos, one close, one mid-range, one that included the timestamp visible on the oven clock behind her. She saved them without reviewing. Then she opened her notes. Burn documented. Visible blistering. Time 8:42 p.m. She added, witnesses Marissa Cole, Daniel Cole. A pause. Then Jonathan's statement, "You startled him." No inquiry into injury. She saved the note. Behind her, Jonathan exhaled again, this time not for effect. "What is this?" he said, more to himself than to her. Aubrey dried her hands and turned slightly, just enough to see him without fully facing him. He stood in the dining room, papers spread now across the sideboard, no longer folded. His posture had lost some of its careful symmetry. "It looks like some kind of audit notice," he said after a moment, as if deciding she should hear it, but on his terms. Aubrey nodded once. Jonathan glanced at her, measuring. "It's probably nothing," he added. "These things happen." They did. But not like this. Not delivered by a process server at dinner. Not requiring a signature. Not structured in language that demanded response. Aubrey knew that without reading a single line. Jonathan gathered the papers again this time, stacking them with more precision than necessary. "I'll handle it," he said. The sentence was familiar. It had been used before. About finances, about decisions, about things Aubrey had never been given full access to. She reached for a clean towel and gently pressed it against her wrist again. The skin pulsed beneath the fabric, but the pain was no longer surprising. It had settled into something consistent. Jonathan watched her for a moment. "You should have said something earlier," he said. about the soup, instead of making it visible. Aubrey looked at him. I didn't make it visible, she said. It happened. Jonathan held her gaze, then looked away first. That's not how it came across. Of course it wasn't, because he defined how it would. Aubrey did not respond. Jonathan shifted his weight, then moved toward the hallway. I have a few calls to make, he said. He didn't wait for acknowledgement. His study door closed a moment later, more firmly than usual. The house adjusted around that sound. Aubrey remained in the kitchen. The dishes were done, the counters clean. Everything returned to its place. But the evening had not reset. It had divided. She turned off the overhead light, leaving only the softer illumination above the sink. The house grew quieter, but not calmer. From down the hall, the low murmur of Jonathan's voice filtered through the closed study door. Not the tone he used in public, not the tone he used at the dinner table. Lower, more urgent. Fragments of words indistinct, but patterned. Aubrey did not move closer. She had learned not to chase information that was already on its way to revealing itself. Instead, she picked up her phone again and opened her email. The private account she had created months ago sat there separate from everything Jonathan had access to. She attached the photos, added the note, sent it to herself. Then she opened a folder. Inside were files organized, dated, labeled simply. Utilities receipts, transfers, notes. She added a new entry. Incident dinner, uploaded the images. Copied the text. Saved. No emotion entered the process. No commentary beyond what could be verified. Because Aubrey understood something clearly now, that had only been forming before emotion could be dismissed. Records could not. She closed the folder and locked her phone. For a moment she stood still, listening. The murmur from the study had shifted again, sharper now, less controlled. A name spoken, then another, then silence. Aubrey turned toward the hallway, not to approach, just to see. The light beneath the study door was still on. A thin line across the floor, contained, for now. She returned to the kitchen and picked up a glass of water, taking a slow sip. The coolness grounded her in a way the room itself no longer could. Lucas's door remained closed down the hall. No sound from inside, no movement. Aubrey considered briefly whether to knock, then didn't. Whatever was beginning to fracture in him would not be resolved tonight. And it would not be guided by words. It would be shaped by what came next. She set the glass down and turned off the remaining light. The kitchen fell into shadow, the outlines of familiar objects still visible but softened. In the darkness, the house felt different. Not because anything had changed physically, because something had been introduced. Not the soup, not the accusation, not even the silence that followed. Something external, documented, delivered, and acknowledged. Aubrey walked toward the stairs, her steps quiet but no longer cautious. Behind her, the study door remained closed. Inside, Jonathan continued speaking into the dark space between what he controlled and what he no longer could. Aubrey did not need to hear the words to understand their shape, and for the first time, she did not need to anticipate them either. She reached the top of the stairs and paused briefly, her hand resting on the railing. Below the house held its structure. Above, the hallway stretched in clean lines toward rooms that had witnessed everything and said nothing. Aubrey stepped forward, not away, not yet, but no longer positioned where she had been. The next morning arrived with the same precision the house always kept. At 6:15, the coffee machine clicked on. At 6:22, the first car passed along Alder Ridge Drive, its tires brushing softly against the pavement. At 6:30, the automatic sprinkler system activated, casting a fine mist over a lawn that had never been allowed to look neglected. From the outside, nothing had shifted. Inside, the sequence held, but the meaning had changed. Aubrey was already awake when the coffee began to brew. She had not slept long, but she had slept clearly, not restfully clearly. The difference mattered. Her thoughts had not scattered in the night. They had arranged themselves. She sat at the small desk near the bedroom window, her laptop open, the early light just beginning to define the edges of the screen. The house was quiet in that particular hour, before movement began, before Jonathan's footsteps, before Lucas's door, before voices re-entered the structure. Her wrist rested lightly on a folded cloth. The burn had darkened slightly overnight, the redness more defined. Now small blisters formed along the most direct line of contact. She had already taken another photo, time-stamped, added to the file. No commentary, just sequence. On the screen, a document was open, not new, but newly organized. Aubrey had begun restructuring her records. What had once been separate notes, scattered observations, saved emails, and archived receipts were now being arranged into timelines. Not emotionally, chronologically. March 3rd, kitchen incident, no intervention. March 11th, transfer alert, amount $8, 400, no prior discussion. April 2nd, Lucas mentions new property, not disclosed. April 14th, dinner. Injury documented, witnesses present. Each entry stood alone. Together they began to form something else. A pattern that did not rely on interpretation, only repetition. Aubrey worked quietly, cross-referencing emails with bank alerts, matching dates with calendar entries, aligning moments that had once seemed isolated into sequences that now made structural sense. She did not rush. There was no advantage in speed now. At 6:47, Jonathan's alarm sounded in the bedroom behind her. Aubrey did not turn. The sound was brief, silenced almost immediately. A pause followed. Then the shift of weight on the mattress. The subtle rhythm of someone sitting up processing the day before speaking into it. Jonathan stepped into the hallway at 6:52. Right on time. He paused when he saw Aubrey already awake, already working. "You're up early," he said. His tone had returned to its usual calm. The urgency from the night before it had been folded away, stored somewhere behind practiced composure. Aubrey nodded once. "I had things to organize." Jonathan studied her for a moment longer than necessary. About last night, he began leaning lightly against the door frame. Aubrey saved her document before turning to face him fully. "What about it?" she asked. Jonathan exhaled through a small, measured breath. It didn't need to escalate the way it did. There it was again. The redefinition. Aubrey met his gaze. "It didn't escalate," she said. "It happened." Jonathan's expression tightened, not in anger, but in adjustment. "You're focusing on the wrong part," he replied. "Lucas didn't mean to hurt you." Aubrey did not respond immediately. Instead, she reached for her phone, unlocked it, and pulled up the image from the night before. She did not show it to him. She simply looked at it once, then set the phone back down. "The result is the same," she said. Jonathan watched her, something sharper now beneath the surface of his composure. "You're making this into something it isn't," he said. Aubrey stood. The movement was calm, deliberate. "No," she said. "I'm recording what it is." Jonathan held her gaze. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he shifted. "Fine," he said, "if that's how you want to handle it." It was not agreement. It was repositioning. He stepped back from the doorway. "I have a meeting this morning," he added, "and I'll be dealing with the paperwork from yesterday." The word paperwork was chosen carefully, neutral, minimizing. Aubrey nodded. Jonathan lingered a second longer. "If anyone asks," he said, "it was an accident." Aubrey looked at him. "Who would ask?" she said. Jonathan's pause was almost imperceptible. "Then people notice things." Aubrey held his gaze. "Yes," she said, "they do." Jonathan turned away first. He moved down the hallway toward the bathroom, his steps controlled, but slightly faster than usual. Aubrey waited until the door closed behind him before returning to her desk. She opened her notes again and added a new entry. April 15th morning. Jonathan states, if anyone asks, it was an accident. She saved it. Then she opened her email. There were 3 new messages. 2 were routine promotions, newsletters, automated notices. The 3rd was not. Subject documentation request, preliminary review, The sender's address was formal, structured, not personal. Aubrey did not open it immediately. She read the subject line twice, then minimized the window. Timing mattered, not for reaction, for placement. At 7:18, Lucas's door opened. His footsteps were slower than usual, less certain. He entered the kitchen without greeting, moving directly to the refrigerator. He opened it, stared inside longer than necessary, then closed it again, without taking anything. Aubrey remained at the table, her laptop now closed, a notebook in front of her. Lucas glanced at her wrist. The mark was visible, more defined in daylight. He looked away quickly. "You're up early," he said. The same sentence Jonathan had used. Different tone. Aubrey nodded. "So are you?" Lucas leaned against the counter, his posture mirroring his father's from the night before, but without the same control. "That wasn't," he started, then stopped. Aubrey did not help him finish. Lucas shifted. "I didn't mean," he tried again. Aubrey looked at him, not accusing, not forgiving, just present. "I know what happened," she said. Lucas's jaw tightened. "You moved," he said, the words arriving more defensively now. Dad said. Aubrey raised her hand slightly, not to stop him, to show him. The burn. Lucas's eyes fixed on it. For a moment, something broke through. Not guilt, recognition. Then it closed again. "I have school," he said abruptly. He grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge and left the kitchen without another word. The front door opened, closed. The house returned to quiet. At 7:42, Jonathan entered the kitchen again, dressed for the day. He moved efficiently now. Coffee poured, phone-checked briefcase set near the door. "Lucas left?" he asked. "Yes." Jonathan nodded. "Good." He picked up his coffee, then paused. "Try to keep things normal today," he said. Aubrey looked at him. "Define normal," she said. Jonathan did not answer. He took his coffee and moved toward the door. "I'll be back late," he added. Then he left. The house emptied. The structure remained. Aubrey stood in the kitchen for a moment after the door closed. Then she walked back to the table, opened her laptop, and pulled up the email she had not yet read. Subject, documentation, request, preliminary review. She opened it. The language was precise, formal, unemotional. It referenced account activity, requested clarification, included dates. Dates Aubrey recognized. Dates she had already recorded. She read the message once, then again. Then she opened her folder. Cross-referenced, matched entries, aligned sequences. The pattern was no longer forming. It was visible. Not complete, but sufficient. Aubrey did not react outwardly. She did not speak. She did not move immediately. She simply sat there reading, confirming, placing each piece exactly where it belonged. Because this email, this request, this alignment between what she had observed and what had now been formally questioned, this was the first time the structure inside the house and the systems outside it had touched. And once they did, they would not separate cleanly again. Aubrey saved the email, downloaded a copy, added it to her file. Then she closed her laptop. The house was quiet. Not empty, not yet, but no longer contained. Lucas Reed did not think of himself as cruel, not in the way people described cruelty in school assemblies or after certain incidents made their way into quiet conversations between teachers. Cruelty in those contexts was loud, obvious, punishable. What he had done the night before did not feel like that. It had felt controlled, measured, expected. That was how he had understood it. But understanding had begun to shift. The school day unfolded in fragments he did not fully register. Voices moved around him, teachers explaining, students responding, the steady rhythm of instruction continuing as if nothing outside the building had changed. Lucas sat through it all, present in body, but not aligned with any of it. In his third period class, his phone vibrated once in his pocket. A message from Jonathan. Focus today. No reference to the night before, no question, no acknowledgement, just instruction. Lucas stared at the screen for a moment before locking it again. Focus on what? The question did not form clearly enough to be asked. It remained beneath the surface like everything else. At lunch, he sat with the same group he always did. The conversation moved around him, sports assignments, a video someone passed across the table. He nodded when expected, smiled once. But his attention kept returning to a single image. Aubrey's wrist. Not the moment the soup hit. The moment after, when she had looked at it and said nothing. That had not been part of the pattern. Usually there was reaction. Not always loud, but enough to confirm the structure-action-response correction. This time, there had been no correction from her. Only from Jonathan. And something about that had unsettled him. After lunch, he was called to the counseling office. Not urgently, not formally. A note handed to him by his fourth-period teacher. When you have a moment, it said. He went. The office was small, deliberately neutral, soft chairs, a desk positioned slightly off-center. A window that looked out onto a section of the schoolyard that rarely held anyone. Miss Carter sat behind the desk, her posture relaxed but attentive. Lucas, she said, offering a small smile. Come in. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Have a seat. He did. There was no immediate question, just a moment of quiet. How have things been going? She asked finally. Lucas shrugged. Fine. Miss Carter nodded, as if that answer carried weight even in its brevity. I've noticed a few things lately, she said. Nothing dramatic, just patterns. Lucas said nothing. Teachers have mentioned that you've been a bit more reactive than usual, she continued. Quick to push back, quick to disengage. Lucas leaned back slightly in his chair. People say stuff. They do, Miss Carter agreed, but I'm more interested in what you say. Lucas looked at her, then away. I'm fine, he repeated. Miss Carter did not challenge the statement. Instead, she shifted slightly. Sometimes, when things change at home, she said it shows up here first. Lucas's gaze snapped back to her. What do you mean? Miss Carter held his gaze steady. I mean that home doesn't stay separate from school, even when we try to keep it that way. Lucas felt something tighten in his chest. There's nothing wrong at home, he said. The sentence came too quickly, too complete. Miss Carter nodded slowly. I didn't say there was, she replied. Another pause. Then, did something happen recently? Lucas's mind moved not toward the event itself, but toward Jonathan's voice. Focus today. And before that, if anyone asks, it was an accident. Lucas's jaw tightened. No, he said. Miss Carter watched him for a moment longer. Then she reached for a file on her desk and opened it, not fully, just enough to glance at something inside. I'm not here to get you in trouble, she said. I'm here to make sure you're okay. Lucas nodded once. I am. Miss Carter closed the file. All right, she said. If that changes, you know where to find me. The conversation ended there. No pressure, no conclusion. Just an opening left available. Lucas left the office with the same controlled pace he had entered. But the structure inside him had shifted slightly. Not enough to break, enough to register. Back at the house, Aubrey was working. The dining table had been cleared of everything except her laptop, a legal pad, and a single stack of printed documents. She had printed the email from that morning. Not because she needed it on paper, because paper could be arranged, seen all at once. She had begun mapping connections. Dates aligned with transactions, transactions aligned with events, events aligned with behavior, Jonathan's increased phone activity, the dinner, the service of documents, the email requesting clarification. Each element placed not as accusation, but as sequence. Aubrey wrote in clean lines, no flourishes. April 10th transfer C statement. April 12th, increased call frequency evening. April 14th, dinner. Incident, service. April 15th, documentation request received. She drew no conclusions. She did not need to. The pattern spoke without interpretation. At 2:17 p.m., her phone vibrated. An unknown number. She let it ring once, twice, then answered. "Hello, Miss Reed." The voice was male, professional, neutral. "Yes, this is Evan Brooks. I was at your residence last night." Aubrey's gaze shifted briefly to the printed documents on the table. "Yes," she said. "I wanted to confirm receipt of the documents served to Mr. Reed," he continued, "and to provide contact information should there be any questions regarding process." Aubrey listened. "I'm not the recipient," she said. "No," Evan replied, "but you are listed in associated documentation." A pause. Aubrey did not speak. "I'm not at liberty to discuss details," he added, "but I can confirm that the matter involves financial review at a preliminary stage." Aubrey's eyes moved to the email on her screen. Documentation request. Preliminary review. The language matched. "Thank you," she said. "If you need verification of service or copies of documentation," Evan continued, "you can contact the office listed on the form." "I understand." The call ended. Aubrey set her phone down. She did not move immediately. Then she reached for her pen and added a new line to her notes. "April 15th call from Evan Brooks. Confirms financial review preliminary." She underlined nothing, circled nothing. The weight was in the alignment. Lucas returned home at 3:32. The front door opened, closed. His footsteps moved through the hallway slower than usual. He stopped when he saw Aubrey at the table. The documents, the arrangement, the quiet. "What are you doing?" he asked. Aubrey looked up. "Working," she said. Lucas stepped closer just enough to see the edge of the papers. Dates, numbers. Not labeled in ways he fully understood, but structured. "Is that about last night?" he asked. Aubrey considered the question. Then, "It's about everything she said." Lucas frowned. "What does that mean?" Aubrey held his gaze. "It means things connect," she said. Lucas shifted his weight. "That doesn't make sense." Aubrey nodded. "It will." Lucas looked at the papers again, then at her wrist, then away. "You're making it a bigger deal than it is," he said. The sentence sounded familiar. Jonathan's voice filtered through a younger one. Aubrey did not correct him. Instead, she reached for her phone, opened the audio folder, and tapped a file. A short clip, unintentional. Recorded earlier in the week when her phone had been left on the kitchen counter. Voices in the background. Jonathan's, Lucas's. "Just do it naturally," Jonathan had said. "Don't make it obvious." A pause. What if she says something Lucas's voice? "She won't," Jonathan replied. "She never does." The recording ended. Silence filled the space between them. Lucas's face changed. Not dramatically, but enough. "That's not," he started, then stopped, because it was. Aubrey locked her phone and set it down. She did not speak. She did not need to. The house held the silence. Not empty, not neutral, but full. For the first time, Lucas was not looking at Aubrey as someone to test. He was looking at her as someone who had been watching longer than he had understood. And the pattern he thought he controlled had begun to turn. Not against him, around him. By the time evening settled over Alder Ridge Drive, Aubrey had already moved beyond reaction. What remained was structure. She had cleared the dining table again, not out of habit this time, but for space. The documents were no longer spread loosely. They were arranged in deliberate sections, each category separated, labeled, and ordered by date. Bank statements formed one column, emails another. Notes and timelines a line beside them. The audio file, now duplicated, backed up, and stored in two separate locations, was referenced, not played again. Aubrey did not revisit evidence for emotional reinforcement, only for placement. She sat at the table with a pen in hand, drawing a line from one date to another. April 10th transfer. April 12th, increased communication. April 14th dinner. Service. April 15th, documentation request. The sequence held. But what mattered more was what sat beneath it. She pulled one of the bank statements closer. The transaction on April 10th was not the first of its kind. There had been others, smaller amounts at first, less noticeable, spread across months, different accounts. But the pattern once seen did not disappear. Each transfer preceded something: a delay, a meeting, a change in Jonathan's behavior. Aubrey circled nothing. She marked nothing with emphasis. Instead, she copied the data into her notebook in clean, unbroken lines. January 22nd, transfer $2.100. February 17th, transfer $3.750. March 11th, transfer $8.400. April 10th, transfer $12.000. The amounts increased. The intervals shortened. Pressure. That was the only interpretation she allowed herself, and even then, she did not write the word. She only wrote what could be proven. At 6:03 p.m., the front door opened. Jonathan entered with the same composed efficiency he had maintained that morning. But Aubrey noticed immediately the shift in his movements, not slower, more contained. He closed the door more carefully than usual, as if aware of the sound in a way he normally controlled without thinking. "You're still working?" he asked, setting his briefcase near the entry. Aubrey did not look up immediately. "Yes." Jonathan stepped into the dining room and paused when he saw the table. Not messy, not chaotic, structured, ordered, visible. "What is this?" he asked. Aubrey lifted her gaze. "Records," she said. Jonathan moved closer, his eyes scanning the layout. For a moment he said nothing. Then he reached for one of the printed bank statements. "You shouldn't have these," he said. The sentence was calm, but it did not deny their accuracy. Aubrey watched him. "They're accessible," she replied. Jonathan placed the paper back down, but not in its original position. A slight misalignment. Intentional. "These aren't for you to interpret," he said. Aubrey picked up her pen and adjusted the paper back into place. "I'm not interpreting," she said. "I'm organizing." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "You're stepping into something you don't understand." Aubrey met his gaze. "Then explain it." Jonathan held her eyes for a moment, then looked away first. "It's business," he said. "Routine adjustments." Aubrey nodded once. "Then it should be easy to clarify." Jonathan exhaled. The sound carried more weight this time. "It's being handled," he said. Another familiar phrase, another boundary. Aubrey did not challenge it directly. Instead, she reached for a printed email and slid it slightly forward, not toward him, but into the space between them. "The request this morning referenced these dates," she said. Jonathan's eyes flicked to the paper. He recognized it. Of course he did. But he did not pick it up. "That doesn't involve you," he said. Aubrey's voice remained even. "It involves the household." Jonathan shook his head. "You're overextending this." Aubrey leaned back slightly in her chair. "No," she said. "I'm aligning it." The word landed differently. Not confrontational. Final. Jonathan's gaze sharpened. For the first time, something like uncertainty moved beneath his control. Not because he didn't understand what she was doing. Because he did. And he had not expected it. "You need to stop," he said. The sentence came quieter now, more direct. Aubrey did not move. No. The refusal was not loud, not emotional. It did not escalate. It simply existed. Jonathan stood there for a moment longer, then turned away abruptly. "I'm not having this conversation tonight," he said. He picked up his briefcase and moved toward his study. The door closed behind him. Not hard, but final. Aubrey remained at the table. She did not follow, did not push further. The conversation had reached its natural edge. Beyond it, there would be no truth, only defense. And Aubrey was no longer working within his structure. She returned to her notes, added a line. April 15th. Jonathan acknowledges transactions, refuses explanation. She paused, then added, "Instruction, you need to stop." She saved the entry, then opened her laptop. The email from that morning remained open. She read it again, this time more slowly. Not for meaning, for language. Preliminary review. Clarification required. Discrepancies noted. Each phrase carried weight. Not accusation, process. Aubrey opened a new document. She began drafting a response. Not emotional, not defensive, structured. To whom it may concern, she typed. I am in receipt of your request dated April 15th regarding account activity associated with Jonathan Reed. I am currently compiling relevant documentation and will provide a complete response within the requested time frame. She stopped, considered, then added, in the interest of accuracy, I will include independently maintained records of transactions, communications, and associated timelines. She read the sentence once, then saved the draft. Not sent, not yet. Timing mattered. At 7:12 p.m., a sound came from down the hall. The study door opened. Jonathan stepped out. His expression had shifted again, not fully composed, but closer. He moved into the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stood there for a moment, without drinking it. Aubrey did not look up. I spoke with someone, Jonathan said finally. Aubrey nodded. I assumed you would. It's a routine review, he continued. Nothing more? Aubrey did not respond. Jonathan waited. Then you're making this harder than it needs to be. Aubrey set her pen down. And you're making it smaller than it is. Jonathan's grip tightened slightly around the glass. The water inside shifted. It's my responsibility, he said. Aubrey looked at him. It's already shared. Jonathan didn't answer, because that was the part he could not reposition. Not anymore. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of alignment. The records on the table, the email on the screen, the audio file stored in two places, the burn on Aubrey's wrist, each element separate, together undeniable. Jonathan set the glass down without drinking. I need to make another call, he said. Aubrey nodded. He returned to the study. The door closed again. Aubrey sat alone in the dining room. The house was quiet, but no longer neutral. She reached for her phone one more time, opened the cloud folder, checked the files, confirmed the backups. Everything was there. Nothing missing, nothing altered. She closed the app, then turned off the overhead light. The table remained visible in the dim glow from the hallway. Ordered, clear, ready. Because what Aubrey understood now fully without hesitation was that this was no longer about a single incident. Not the soup, not the accusation, not even the documents delivered at the door. It was about sequence, and sequence once established could not be undone by explanation. Only by evidence. And she had begun to build it. By Thursday morning, Jonathan had already begun telling the story. Not all at once, not in any single place, but in fragments placed carefully distributed across conversations that did not appear connected. At 8:12 a.m., he called Marissa. Aubrey did not hear the call itself. She did not need to. She saw the record later in the call log Jonathan forgot to clear. 11 minutes, outgoing. At 9:03, he sent an email to Daniel. Subject line neutral, follow up from dinner. At 10:27, a message to a colleague. Things are a bit tense at home. Managing it. The language was consistent, measured, positioning. Aubrey did not intercept these communications in real time. She discovered them the way she discovered everything else, through pattern and through access points left unguarded, not because they were invisible, but because Jonathan had never needed to guard them before. Silence had always done that for him. Until now. At 11:40 a.m., Aubrey stood in the small office of a walk-in medical clinic 2 blocks from Alder Ridge Drive. The doctor, Dr. Patel, examined her wrist with practiced efficiency. How did this happen, he asked. A spill, Aubrey said. The answer was not inaccurate. It was not complete. Dr. Patel nodded, noting the severity of the burn. 2nd degree, he said. Localized, but we'll want to monitor it. He applied a cooling gel, then a clean, dressing his movements precise and unremarkable. Any other injuries? No, he made a note in the chart. Pain level manageable. He glanced at her briefly, then back to the form. I'll document it, he said, just in case it needs follow-up. Aubrey nodded. That would be helpful. He finished the dressing, then stepped back. You'll want to keep it clean, avoid friction, and come back if it worsens. I understand. He handed her a printed summary. Diagnosis, time, date. Aubrey accepted it with both hands, not because she needed to, Because she understood its place. Back at the house, the atmosphere had shifted again. Not visibly, but structurally. Jonathan had left earlier than usual that morning. Lucas had gone to school without speaking. The house now held only Aubrey and the quiet accumulation of what had been set in motion. She placed the medical report on the dining table, aligning it with the other documents. April 16th, medical confirmation, second-degree burn. She added the entry to her notes. Then she opened her laptop. Jonathan's email account was not something she accessed directly. She did not need to. Shared devices, auto-saved sessions, fragments left open. The system had always been built for convenience, not scrutiny. She navigated carefully, not searching broadly, but following threads she already knew existed. The email to Daniel appeared in the sent folder. She opened it. Daniel just wanted to follow up from last night. There was a small incident. Nothing serious, but Aubrey tends to react strongly to things like that. It can make situations feel bigger than they are. I appreciate you and Marissa being understanding. Let's connect soon about the property discussion. Best Jonathan. Aubrey read it once. Then again, no mention of the burn, no mention of the sequence, only framing. She did not react. She saved a copy, added it to her folder, labeled April 15th, narrative external. Then she closed the email. At 2:05 p.m., her phone rang. Marissa, Aubrey answered. Hello, Aubrey. Marissa said, her voice careful. I just wanted to check in. Aubrey stood near the window, looking out at the street. I'm all right, she said. There was a pause. I wasn't sure Marissa replied. Last night felt off. Aubrey did not feel the silence that followed. I spoke with Jonathan this morning, Marissa added. Aubrey turned slightly, her reflection faint in the glass. I assumed you might. Marissa hesitated. He said it was an accident, she said. The word lingered. Aubrey did not respond immediately. Then, that's what he said. Marissa exhaled softly. It didn't look like one. Aubrey closed her eyes for a brief moment. Not from emotion, from alignment. What did it look like, she asked. Marissa did not answer right away. I don't know, she said finally, but it didn't look like you startled him. Aubrey nodded, though Marissa could not see it. Thank you for saying that, she said. Another pause. If you need anything, Marissa began. Aubrey interrupted gently. I'm handling it. Marissa didn't push. All right, she said. Just take care of yourself. The call ended. Aubrey stood there for a moment longer, the phone still in her hand. Then she returned to the table. She added a note. April 16th. Marissa Cole confirms observation inconsistent with accident. No embellishment, no interpretation, just record. Lucas returned home earlier than expected. 3:10 p.m. The front door opened quickly, closed harder than usual. His footsteps moved through the hallway with less control. He entered the dining room and stopped. The table, the documents, more than before. What is all this, he asked. Aubrey looked up. Work, she said. Lucas stepped closer, his eyes scanning the papers. What kind of work? Aubrey considered the question. Then the kind that doesn't go away. Lucas frowned. That doesn't make sense. Aubrey held his gaze. It will. Lucas's attention shifted to one of the documents. The medical report. He read the first line. Second-degree burn. His expression changed. Subtly. You went to a doctor, he asked. Yes, Lucas swallowed. I said I didn't mean to. Aubrey raised her hand slightly. Not to stop him. To redirect. This isn't about what you meant, she said. Lucas's jaw tightened. Then what is it about? Aubrey gestured to the table. It's about what happened. Lucas looked at the papers again, then at her, then away. You're trying to get Dad in trouble, he said. The sentence came quickly, defensively. Aubrey did not react to the accusation. I'm documenting what exists, she said. Lucas shook his head. That's the same thing. Aubrey did not correct him, because in his understanding it was, but not in reality. Lucas stepped back. You're making everything worse, he said. Aubrey watched him. Worse than what she asked. Lucas didn't answer. because he did not have a version of before that held anymore. He turned and walked out of the room. His footsteps echoed down the hallway. A door closed, hard. The house absorbed the sound. At 4:22 p.m., Aubrey sat down again. She'd opened her laptop, reviewed the documents, aligned them once more. Then she opened her draft email, read it from the beginning, made one change. In the interest of documented accuracy, a small adjustment, precise. She saved it, still did not send it, because timing was not just about readiness. It was about sequence. And the sequence was still unfolding. Jonathan's narrative was already in motion. Marissa's doubt had entered it. Lucas's certainty had fractured. The records had begun to align. The systems outside the house had made contact. Everything was moving. Not quickly, not loudly, but forward. Aubrey closed her laptop, placed her pen beside it, and sat there in the quiet. Not waiting, not reacting, but holding the structure she had built. Because what Jonathan had begun to understand, and what Lucas was only beginning to feel, was that this was no longer a story that could be told into existence. It was one that had already been written, line by line, date by date. And it would not change because someone said it differently. Elena Brooks did not decorate her office. There were no framed quotes about justice, no curated shelves meant to signal personality or persuasion. The space was functional, clean lines, neutral tones, a desk that held only what was necessary, a legal pad, a pen aligned parallel to its edge, a closed laptop positioned exactly center. When Aubrey stepped inside, she noticed the absence of distraction before she noticed anything else. "Miss Reed," Elena said, standing briefly to greet her. "Please have a seat." Her voice was even, not warm, not cold, precise. Aubrey sat. Elena did not begin with pleasantries. "You mentioned in your message that you've been documenting a series of events," she said. "I'd like to start there." Aubrey placed a folder on the desk. "Not everything, not yet. A curated portion." Elena opened it without comment. Inside, printed emails, bank statements, a summarized timeline, and a single-page medical report. She read in silence, not skimming, not reacting, reading. The room remained still except for the faint movement of paper as she turned each page. Aubrey watched, not for approval, not for validation, but for recognition. It came not in words, but in the way Elena paused on certain entries. April 10th, April 14th, April 15th. The alignment held. Elena placed the last page down and folded her hands lightly over the file. "How long have you been keeping records?" she asked. "Several months," Aubrey said. Elena nodded once. "And the incident on April 14th, she continued, was that the first physical injury Aubrey considered. The first that required documentation," she said. Elena did not press further. Instead, she reached for her pen and wrote a single note on the legal pad. Then she looked up. "Let me be clear about something," she said. "This is not about a single event." Aubrey met her gaze. "I understand." Elena tapped the folder lightly. "This is pattern," she said. "Behavioral and financial." She turned one of the bank statements toward Aubrey. "These transfers, were you informed of them in advance?" "No." "Do you have joint access to all accounts?" Elena nodded. "That's consistent with control structures," she said. "Limited visibility, selective disclosure." Aubrey did not respond. Elena continued. "The medical documentation is important," she added, "not because of severity alone, but because it anchors the timeline to a verifiable event." She lifted the report slightly, then set it back down. "And the witnesses present," Aubrey said, not intervening. Elena made another note. "Names Marissa Cole, Daniel Cole." Elena wrote them down. "Have either provided a statement, not formally." Elena nodded. "They may not need to, not immediately." She closed the folder. "What matters right now is sequence," she said. "You've done something very specific here. You've separated observation from interpretation." Aubrey held her gaze. That was intentional. Elena allowed the smallest shift in expression. Good, she said, because interpretation can be challenged. Sequence is harder to dismantle. She leaned back slightly. Now let's talk about exposure. The words settled in the room without emphasis. Your husband has already begun shaping a narrative, Elena continued. That's predictable. Aubrey nodded. He's framing the incident as isolated, she said. Emotional overreaction. Elena did not look surprised. Which is why we don't respond to narrative with narrative, she said. We respond with structure. She opened her laptop now, the first visible shift in the meeting. I'm going to outline next steps, she said. Her fingers moved quickly, but not hurriedly. First, preservation, she said. Everything you have, emails, audio, images, notes, needs to exist in at least 2 secure locations. It does, Aubrey said. Elena glanced up briefly. Good. Second, medical continuity, she continued. Follow up on the injury, not because of pain, but because of record. Aubrey nodded. Third, financial trace, Elena said. These transfers, if they align with external review, they will become central. She paused. You mentioned a documentation request. Aubrey reached into her bag and handed over a printed copy of the email. Elena read it once. Then again. Her expression did not change, but her posture did, slightly more forward. This is not preliminary in the way it appears, she said. Aubrey waited. It's early stage, yes, Elena clarified. But it indicates prior observation. Aubrey understood. They've been watching, she said. Elena nodded. Most likely. She closed the laptop. Which means timing matters, she said. Not for them. For you. Aubrey remained still. I've drafted a response, she said. Elena held out her hand. Aubrey passed her the printed draft. Elena read it carefully, line by line. When she finished, she set it down. This is appropriate, she said. Measured, structured, no overreach. Aubrey did not react. Elena tapped one sentence lightly. In the interest of documented accuracy, she read. That's strong. She looked up. When you send this, you're entering the process formally, she said. There's no reversal after that. Aubrey met her gaze. I'm not looking for reversal. Elena held her eyes for a moment longer, then nodded. Good, she said. She gathered the documents into a single stack and aligned them precisely. Now she continued. We also need to address domestic liability. Aubrey's attention sharpened slightly. The injury occurred in the home, Elena said, in the presence of witnesses, with a minor involved. Aubrey did not interrupt. That doesn't make it simple, Elena added, but it makes it documentable. She wrote another note. We will not frame this as retaliation, she said. We will frame it as record. Aubrey understood the distinction. Elena closed the folder and slid it back toward her. Your strength here is not in confrontation, she said. It's in consistency. Aubrey took the folder. That's how I've approached it. Elena nodded. And that's how you continue. She stood. The meeting was ending. Send the email, she said. But not tonight. Aubrey paused. Why? Because he's still adjusting, Elena replied. Let him settle into his version of events. Aubrey considered that, then nodded. Tomorrow morning, Elena added. Early. Aubrey stood as well. Understood. Elena extended her hand. Aubrey shook it. Firm, neutral, no performance. As Aubrey turned to leave, Elena spoke once more. Miss Reed. Aubrey paused. Elena met her gaze. You're not building a case, she said. Aubrey waited. You're revealing one. Aubrey held her eyes for a moment, then nodded, and left. Outside, the air was cooler than it had been that morning. Aubrey stood on the sidewalk for a moment, the folder held steady in her hand. No rush, no hesitation. The path ahead had not changed. It had clarified. She walked to her car, placed the folder carefully on the passenger's seat, and sat behind the wheel. Before starting the engine, she reached for her phone, opened the draft email, read it once more, then closed it. Not yet. Timing mattered. Inside the house, Jonathan was still speaking into his version of events. Lucas was still moving through the uncertainty of his own. But the structure Aubrey had built no longer depended on either of them. It existed independently now, aligned, documented, ready. She started the car and drove. By Friday evening, the house no longer held a single version of reality. It held three. Jonathan's was still the most polished. Lucas's was beginning to fracture. Aubrey's did not require belief. Only alignment. Jonathan returned home earlier than expected. 5:18 p.m. The front door opened with controlled force, not loud enough to signal anger, but firm enough to register intention. Aubrey was already in the dining room. The table was clear. The documents were no longer visible. That more than anything unsettled him. He moved everything he said. Aubrey looked up from her notebook. I organized it. Jonathan stepped closer, scanning the room, as if the absence itself were a statement. Where is it, he asked. Aubrey closed the notebook. Stored. Jonathan's jaw tightened. You don't get to just... He stopped himself, adjusted. You're escalating this unnecessarily, he said instead. Aubrey held his gaze. I've already entered the process, she said. Jonathan's expression shifted. Not dramatically, but enough. What process? Aubrey did not answer immediately. She watched him, measured the question. Then, the one that was already in motion before I stepped into it. Jonathan's eyes narrowed slightly. You've been talking to someone. It was not a question. Aubrey did not deny it. Yes. Jonathan exhaled a short, controlled release. Who? Aubrey did not respond. Jonathan stepped closer. You're making a mistake, he said. Aubrey remained seated. No, she said. I'm documenting one. Jonathan's control slipped just slightly. This is exactly what I meant, he said. You're turning something manageable into something complicated. Aubrey tilted her head a fraction. It was already complicated, she said. You just kept it contained. Jonathan's silence stretched. Then, you don't understand how these things work. Aubrey met his gaze. I understand how records work. That was the line. Jonathan turned away, abruptly, running a hand across the back of his neck, a gesture he rarely allowed himself. This is not how you handle this, he said more to the room than to her. Aubrey did not respond. Because he was right. It was not how he handled things. Lucas was in the hallway, listening, not intentionally at first. He had come down for something water maybe, but stopped when he heard Jonathan's voice shift. He stood just out of sight, the edge of the wall separating him from the dining room. He could hear enough, not every word, but enough to understand tone. And tone in this house had always mattered more than language. You're making a mistake. You don't understand. This is not how you handle this. Lucas had heard those phrases before, directed at others. Never at Aubrey like this, not this directly. Something had changed. He leaned slightly, just enough to see into the room. Aubrey sat still, not defensive, not retreating. Jonathan stood, not in control, not fully. Lucas felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Not fear, not yet. Displacement. The structure he had relied on action-response correction was no longer holding. Aubrey was not responding the way she was supposed to. Jonathan was not correcting the way he always had. The pattern had broken. And Lucas did not know where to stand without it. Back in the dining room, Jonathan had regained some of his composure. He straightened, slightly adjusting his stance. Look, he said, his tone shifting again lower, now more controlled. We can resolve this without outside involvement. Aubrey watched him. How? She asked. Jonathan hesitated. Then I'll explain the transactions, he said. We'll clarify what needs to be clarified. Aubrey held his gaze. You've had months to do that. Jonathan's expression hardened. That's not fair. Aubrey did not raise her voice. It's accurate. Jonathan took a step back. The distance between them widened. This isn't just about the transfers, he said. You're tying everything together. Aubrey nodded once. Yes. Jonathan let out a short breath. That's exactly the problem. Aubrey tilted her head slightly. or the solution? Jonathan looked at her for a long moment. Then, you think this ends well? Aubrey considered the question. Then I think it ends clearly. Jonathan's gaze sharpened. That's not the same thing. Aubrey did not disagree. I know. Silence settled between them. Not empty, not neutral. Final. Lucas stepped back from the hallway. Quietly. He moved into the kitchen, his footsteps softer now, as if the house itself required a different kind of movement. He opened the fridge, not because he needed anything, but because it gave him something to do. The light spilled across the shelves. Unchanged. Everything in its place. Unlike the rest of the house. He closed it again. His reflection caught briefly in the stainless steel surface. He looked at himself, then away. The memory returned. The audio. Just do it naturally. Don't make it obvious. She won't. Lucas leaned against the counter, his hands pressing lightly against the edge. That had been real. Not something Aubrey had constructed, not something Jonathan had explained. Something recorded. Something that existed outside of both of them. And now everything Aubrey was doing seemed to follow that same logic. Not arguing, not reacting, recording, aligning. Lucas pushed himself upright. He moved back toward the hallway, not to listen this time, to enter. When he stepped into the dining room, both Aubrey and Jonathan turned. The interruption was quiet, but it mattered. What Jonathan said sharper than intended. Lucas didn't answer immediately. He looked at Aubrey, then at Jonathan, then back at Aubrey. What happens next, he asked. The question hung in the air. Jonathan moved first. Nothing happens, he said. This gets handled. Lucas didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on Aubrey. Aubrey considered the question, then answered. Next, she said, things get documented. Lucas frowned. They already are. Aubrey nodded. Yes. Lucas shifted his weight, and then Aubrey held his gaze, and then they get reviewed. Lucas's jaw tightened. By who? Aubrey didn't hesitate. By people who don't live here. The sentence landed, heavier than anything else that had been said. Jonathan stepped forward. That's enough, he said. Aubrey did not look at him. Lucas did. For the first time, there was something like uncertainty in his expression, not just about Aubrey, but about Jonathan. Is that true? Lucas asked. Jonathan's answer came quickly. No. But it lacked something, not conviction, alignment. Lucas looked back at Aubrey. She did not repeat herself. She did not argue. She simply remained where she was. And that, more than anything, shifted the balance. Because Lucas understood something then that he had not understood before. Jonathan's version required agreement. Aubrey's did not. The moment passed without resolution. Lucas stepped back. Jonathan turned away. Aubrey remained still. The house absorbed the exchange, not resolving it, holding it. Later that night, after the lights had dimmed and the rooms had settled into their usual quiet, Aubrey sat alone at the dining table once more. The documents remained stored. The structure remained intact. She opened her laptop, pulled up the draft email, read it again. Then, without hesitation, this time she scheduled it. Send 6:00 a.m. Not immediate, not delayed. Placed. She closed the laptop and sat there for a moment longer. Because what had shifted that evening was not just the structure of the house. It was the understanding within it. Jonathan knew the process had begun. Lucas knew it would not stop. And Aubrey no longer needed either of them to acknowledge it. The sequence was in motion. And it would continue, exactly as recorded. At exactly 6:00 a.m., the email left Aubrey's outbox. No sound marked its departure. No visible confirmation beyond the small shift in status from scheduled to sent. But the moment carried weight, not because of what it announced, but because of what it initiated. Aubrey was already awake when it went through. She did not watch the screen as it sent. She did not wait for a reply. She closed her laptop, placed it neatly on the table, and continued with the same measured routine the house expected of her. Coffee, water, a clean cloth over her wrist. Sequence remained intact. But now it extended beyond the house. At 6:27 a.m., Jonathan's phone vibrated on the nightstand. He woke instantly. Not gradually, not with the slow reorientation of someone easing into the day. Instantly, because something in him had been waiting. He reached for the phone before the second vibration. The screen lit his face in the dim light of the bedroom. Subject line, forwarded, not from Aubrey, from the same address that had sent the initial request. Redocumentation, request preliminary review. Jonathan sat up, opened it, read. The message was brief. Acknowledgement of receipt. Confirmation of additional materials. Notice of expanded review scope. His jaw tightened. He read it again, then scrolled. Attachments listed. Files named. Not his files. Hers. He recognized the dates immediately. April 10th, April 14th, April 15th. The alignment. He stood. Too quickly. The movement disrupted the stillness of the room. Aubrey, already in the hallway, heard it. Not the words. The shift. By the time Jonathan entered the kitchen, Aubrey was at the sink rinsing a glass. Her posture was the same as every other morning. Controlled, present, not waiting. "What did you send?" The question arrived without greeting, without preface. Aubrey turned off the water and set the glass down. "Documentation," she said. Jonathan stepped closer. To who Aubrey met his gaze. The same office that contacted you. Jonathan's breath sharpened. "You had no right," he stopped. Not because he reconsidered, because he realized the statement would not hold. Aubrey's voice remained even. "I responded to a request." Jonathan ran a hand through his hair, pacing once across the kitchen before turning back. "You've expanded this," he said. "You've brought in information that wasn't part of the original inquiry." Aubrey tilted her head slightly. "It aligns with it." Jonathan shook his head. "That's not your call to make." Aubrey did not move. "It's already been made." Jonathan's gaze hardened. "You don't understand what you've triggered." Aubrey held his eyes. "I understand that it was already in motion." Jonathan's silence stretched. "Then you've made this adversarial." Aubrey shook her head once. "No," she said. "I've made it visible." Lucas stood at the top of the stairs. He had heard the voices, not the full conversation. Just enough to know something had shifted again. He descended slowly, each step quieter than usual. He stopped halfway down, just out of sight. Jonathan's voice carried more clearly now. "This was manageable," he said. "Now it's not." Aubrey's response followed. It wasn't manageable. It was contained. Lucas gripped the railing. The words did not fully make sense, but the tone did. This was no longer about dinner, or the soup, or even the papers that had arrived at the door. This was something else, something larger, and it was moving without asking him. In the kitchen, Jonathan had stopped pacing. He stood still now, his hands braced lightly against the counter. "What exactly did you send?" he asked. Aubrey answered without hesitation. "Timeline, transactions, medical report, audio reference." Jonathan's head snapped up. Audio Aubrey held his gaze. "Yes." Jonathan stepped back as if the word itself carried force. "You had no right to record." Aubrey interrupted, not loudly. "I didn't record intentionally." Jonathan stared at her. But the distinction did not help him, because intentional or not, the result existed. And it had been shared. "You're exposing things that were never meant to be external," he said. Aubrey's expression did not change. They already were. Jonathan let out a short, sharp breath. "This is going to escalate," he said. Aubrey nodded. "Yes." The agreement unsettled him more than resistance would have, because she was not trying to prevent it. She was acknowledging it. At 7:02 a.m., Jonathan's phone rang. He didn't hesitate this time. He answered immediately. "Yes." A pause. Aubrey watched him. His posture shifted again. Not defensive, not controlled, reactive. "I've seen the response," he said. Another pause. No, that wasn't authorized. A longer pause. Jonathan turned slightly away, lowering his voice, but not enough to disappear. "I understand," he said. "But that's not the full context." Aubrey did not move. did not listen actively. But she did not need to. The conversation was not for her. The result would be. Jonathan's voice tightened. No, we can clarify that. Pause. Yes, pause. I'll provide additional documentation. Pause. I understand the timeline. The call ended. Jonathan stood there, the phone still in his hand. Then he lowered it slowly. They're expanding the review, he said. Aubrey nodded. I expected that. Jonathan looked at her. You expected this? Aubrey met his gaze. Yes. Jonathan's expression shifted frustration calculation, something else beneath it. You forced their hand, he said. Aubrey shook her head. No, she said. I confirmed what they already suspected. Lucas stepped down the final stair. He entered the kitchen without speaking. Jonathan turned. Go get ready for school, he said. Lucas didn't move. What's happening? He asked. Jonathan's answer came quickly. Nothing that concerns you. Lucas looked at him. Then at Aubrey. Then back at Jonathan. That's not what it sounds like. Jonathan's jaw tightened. I said it's handled. Lucas shook his head slightly. You said that before? The sentence landed. Jonathan's eyes narrowed. This is not a discussion. Lucas didn't respond. Because for the first time, he understood something clearly. Jonathan's control depended on acceptance. And acceptance was no longer automatic. Aubrey reached for her phone, opened her notes, added a line. April 16th response sent. Review expanded. She saved it. Then she looked up. The kitchen held all three of them. Not aligned, not resolved, but present. Jonathan moved first. I have to go, he said. He grabbed his briefcase, his movements sharper now, less controlled. At the door, he paused. Looked back. This isn't over, he said. Aubrey held his gaze. I know. Jonathan left. The door closed. Silence returned. Lucas stood in the kitchen, his posture uncertain. He looked at Aubrey. What happens now? He asked again. Aubrey considered the question. Then, now she said, they look at everything. Lucas swallowed. And then Aubrey's voice remained steady. Then they decide what it means. Lucas looked down, then back at her. And Aubrey held his gaze. That depends on what we do next. Lucas didn't answer. He turned and walked toward the door. Slower this time, more deliberate. The house settled again, but not into its old structure, into something else, something open, something observed. Aubrey remained where she was for a moment longer. Then she picked up her phone, checked the sent email, confirmed receipt, everything aligned. No gaps, no inconsistencies. The process had moved beyond the house, beyond conversation, beyond narrative. And now, it would continue. Without needing permission, by Monday morning the house had learned a new kind of silence. Not the controlled quiet Jonathan once maintained, where absence of conflict implied stability. This silence was different. It held awareness. Every room seemed to recognize that something had shifted beyond repair. Lucas had not slept well. The weekend had passed without structure. No family meals, no shared routines. Jonathan had been in and out of the house, taking calls behind closed doors, leaving before explanations could be asked. Aubrey had remained present, but not engaged, her movement steady, her attention elsewhere, her silence no longer passive. Lucas moved through these days without a clear position, not aligned with either of them, not outside it either. On Monday, he sat in the counseling office again. This time, he had asked to be there. Miss Carter did not comment on that. She simply nodded and gestured for him to sit. Lucas dropped into the chair, his posture less guarded than before, but not open. There was a long pause before either of them spoke. I think I need to say something, Lucas said finally. Miss Carter leaned back slightly. You can, she said. Lucas looked at the floor, then at his hands, then up. It wasn't an accident, he said. The words landed without force. But they held. Miss Carter did not interrupt. Lucas swallowed. I knew what I was doing, he continued. Not exactly like that, but I knew. He paused. I just didn't think it would matter. Miss Carter's voice remained steady. What made you think that Lucas hesitated? Then because it never did before. The sentence settled, not as an excuse, as a structure. Miss Carter nodded slowly, and now she asked. Lucas looked away. Now it does. Another pause. What changed, she asked. Lucas exhaled. She didn't react, he said. Miss Carter waited. She didn't yell. She didn't do anything, Lucas continued. She just recorded it. The word felt strange in his mouth. Miss Carter noted it. And that was different, she said. Lucas nodded. Yeah. He leaned back slightly, his shoulders pressing into the chair. And my dad, he added. He stopped. Miss Carter did not push. Lucas continued anyway. He told me to do stuff like that before he said. The sentence came quieter, but clearer. Miss Carter's expression did not change. What kind of stuff, she asked. Lucas hesitated, then just little things, to see how she'd react. A pause. He said she wouldn't say anything. Miss Carter wrote something down. Lucas watched her. You're right in that, he said. Yes, she replied. Lucas swallowed. Is that bad? Miss Carter looked up. It's accurate, she said. Lucas nodded. He looked down again. I didn't think it would turn into this, he said. Miss Carter closed the notebook gently. Most things don't start that way, she said. Lucas sat there for a moment longer. Then, what happens now? Miss Carter considered him. Now, she said, you decide what you do with what you know. Lucas didn't answer, but the question stayed. At the same time across town, Aubrey sat in Elena Brooks's office again. The folder was thicker now, not messier, expanded. Elena reviewed the new additions in silence. The sent email, the acknowledgement, the updated request. And now, a written summary of Lucas's statement. Not formal testimony. Not yet, but documented. Elena placed the paper down carefully. This changes the scale, she said. Aubrey nodded. Yes. Elena tapped the page lightly. Not because of what he did, she said, but because of what was directed. Aubrey remained still. He was instructed, Elena continued. That introduces intent. Aubrey did not respond, because she understood. Elena leaned back. Has he made a formal statement, she asked. No, Aubrey said. Not outside of school. Elena nodded. That may change, she said, especially if the review expands further. She opened her laptop, typed briefly, then looked up. Jonathan is under increasing pressure, she said, financially and now procedurally. Aubrey held her gaze. He knows, she said. Elena nodded. And he's adjusting, she replied. Which means we don't. Aubrey understood. Consistency, sequence, no deviation. Elena closed the laptop. You're not pushing this, she said. Aubrey met her eyes. No, you're allowing it to unfold, Elena added. Yes. Elena gave a small nod. Good. She gathered the documents into a single stack. Then we continue. Back at the house, Jonathan was alone. For the first time in days, the phone was silent. No calls, no messages, no immediate demands. He sat in his study, the documents spread across his desk, not in order, not aligned. Disrupted. He read through them again. The request, the response, the expansion. Each piece familiar now, each piece no longer manageable. He stopped at the audio transcript. Short, partial, but enough. Just do it naturally. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes. For a moment, the structure he had maintained for years, the careful balance of control, omission, timing, felt unstable. Not collapsed, but exposed. He opened his eyes again, reached for his phone, then stopped, because there was no one left to call who could reposition this. Not through explanation, not through tone, not through narrative. The records existed, and they did not respond. Lucas returned home later that afternoon. He entered quietly. The house felt different, not tense, not loud, just open. He walked into the dining room. Aubrey was there, working, as always. He stood for a moment before speaking. I told someone, he said. Aubrey looked up. Who, my counselor? Aubrey nodded once, and Lucas hesitated. I said it wasn't an accident. Aubrey held his gaze. Okay. Lucas shifted. I said Dad told me to do stuff before. Aubrey did not react outwardly. Okay. Lucas frowned slightly. That's it? Aubrey considered him. What do you want it to be? She asked. Lucas didn't answer, because he didn't know. He looked at the table. No documents, no visible evidence. Oh, but he knew it was there. Somewhere? All of this is because of that, he asked. Aubrey shook her head. No. Lucas looked at her. Then what Aubrey held his gaze. It's because it kept happening. Lucas swallowed. The sentence landed. He nodded slowly, then turned and walked away. Not running, not retreating, just moving. That evening the house remained quiet. Jonathan did not return until late. Lucas stayed in his room. Aubrey sat at the table once more. Her laptop open, her notes aligned. She added a new entry. April 18th, Lucas Statement Counselor. Confirms prior instruction. She saved it. Then she closed the laptop. Not because there was nothing left to do, because the sequence was holding. Everything that needed to be placed had been placed. Everything that needed to be recorded had been recorded. The rest would not come from her. It would come from what had already been set in motion. Aubrey sat there a moment longer. The house around her still, not empty, not resolved, but no longer controlled by a single version of truth. And in that space, something else had begun to take shape. Not justice yet, not outcome, but direction, clear, unavoidable, and already moving forward. By the time the formal review reached its decisive stage, the process no longer belonged to any single person within the house on Alder Ridge Drive. It had moved beyond individual control, beyond interpretation, and beyond the carefully maintained narratives that had once defined every interaction within those walls. What remained now was sequence-structured, verified, and resistant to distortion. The meeting was not dramatic. There was no raised voice, no sudden revelation delivered for effect, no moment designed for emotional impact. Instead, it unfolded in the manner most consequential proceedings do, quietly, methodically, and with an emphasis on consistency rather than spectacle. Aubrey sat across from Elena Brooks in a conference room that resembled her office in its restraint. Clean lines, neutral tones, a table large enough to separate without isolating. On the opposite side, two representatives from the reviewing body had arranged their materials in equally precise order. Their names had been introduced at the beginning of the session, but they did not carry weight in the way the documents did. Jonathan arrived several minutes after Aubrey, not late enough to draw attention, but not early enough to establish control. He took his seat without acknowledging her, directly placing his folder on the table with deliberate care, as though the act itself might restore some degree of balance. Lucas was not present. His role, while significant, had already been documented through appropriate channels. His statement existed now as part of the record, not as a performance within the room. The review began without preamble. A representative spoke first, outlining the scope financial discrepancies across multiple accounts, a pattern of transfers inconsistent with reported activity, and supplemental materials provided that expanded the context in which those transactions occurred. No accusation was made. No conclusion stated. Only structure presented. Elena did not interrupt. Aubrey did not speak. Jonathan listened, his posture held carefully upright, though the stillness required effort now rather than discipline. The first set of documents focused on the financial records. Bank statements were reviewed in sequence, each transaction placed within a timeline that Aubrey had already constructed. The representatives did not rely on her notes alone. They cross-referenced independent records, verified account movements, and aligned each transfer with corresponding dates. January, February, March, April. The pattern held, amounts increased, intervals shortened. Explanations when offered previously failed to account for the timing. Jonathan was given the opportunity to respond. This reflects internal reallocation. He said, his voice steady but measured in a way that suggested calculation rather than confidence. These were not external liabilities. The representative nodded, and yet he replied, "The documentation indicates otherwise." He turned a page, sliding it forward. An email, time-stamped, referencing an account not disclosed in prior statements. Jonathan glanced at it briefly, then back up. That was pending clarification, he said. Elena remained still. Aubrey did not look at him. The representative made a note. Clarification was requested, he said. It was not provided. The review continued. Each response from Jonathan was met not with contradiction, but with alignment against existing records. His explanations did not collapse dramatically. They weakened incrementally, losing coherence as each additional document narrowed the space in which interpretation could operate. Then the focus shifted, not abruptly, but inevitably. To the domestic incident documented on April 14th, the representative said. Aubrey's medical report was placed on the table, not as an isolated piece, but as an anchor within the timeline. Second-degree burn, the representative read, confirmed by attending physician. Jonathan's gaze moved briefly toward the paper, then away. It was an accident, he said. The statement, once sufficient to define the event within the house, now entered a different structure. The representative nodded slightly. That is your position, he said. He reached for another document. A summary of witness observations. Marissa Cole's statement had been provided voluntarily after initial contact. It was careful, measured, but clear in one regard. The motion did not appear accidental. Daniel Cole's account aligned. Neither exaggerated, neither speculated. They simply described. Then the audio reference was introduced. Not played aloud in the room. Not necessary. Its existence had already been verified. Its content summarized. Just do it naturally. She won't say anything. Jonathan's posture shifted, the first visible break in his composure since the meeting began. That recording lacks context, he said. Elena spoke for the first time. It provides sequence, she replied. The distinction settled into the room. Not argument, definition. The representative nodded. And sequence, he added, is what we are reviewing. Jonathan leaned back slightly, his hands now resting flat against the table, no longer aligned. This is being mischaracterized, he said. Aubrey remained still. Elena did not respond immediately, because she did not need to. The documents continued to speak. Lucas's statement was referenced next, not in full, not dramatized, but placed within the broader pattern. A minor instructed to engage in behavior that aligned with a developing sequence of events. Jonathan did not look at Aubrey. He did not look at Elena. He looked at the table, at the documents, at the structure he could no longer rearrange. The representative closed the folder in front of him. Based on the materials reviewed, he said, we are proceeding with formal findings. There was no pause for effect, no moment designed to heighten tension, only continuation. Financial discrepancies will be subject to further investigation under applicable statutes, he said. Associated accounts are now under review. He shifted slightly. The domestic incident, while not independently criminal in this context, is relevant to the established pattern and will be included in the record. Jonathan's silence remained. Not chosen, imposed. Aubrey listened. Not for outcome, for confirmation. The representative concluded. You will be notified of next steps in writing, he said. The meeting ended without ceremony. Chairs moved. Documents were gathered. No one lingered. Outside the building, the air carried the neutrality of a day that had not changed in response to what had just occurred. Aubrey stood for a moment beside Elena. Neither spoke immediately. Then Elena turned to her. This is where it separates, she said. Aubrey met her gaze. From what Elena's expression remained composed. From narrative, she said, into consequence. Aubrey nodded once. There was no satisfaction in the movement. Only recognition. Jonathan exited the building several moments later. He did not approach them. He did not speak. He walked past, his pace controlled, but no longer measured in the way it once had been. The structure remained, but the center had shifted. Aubrey watched him go. Not with anger, not with triumph, but with the clarity that comes when something is no longer uncertain. Because what had been presented inside that room had not been her argument. It had been the sequence. And sequence once established does not require defense. It remains, even when everything else changes. The house on Alder Ridge Drive did not change overnight. Its structure remained intact. The lawn was still cut on schedule, the porch lights still turned on at dusk, and the windows still reflected the same quiet symmetry that had once suggested stability to anyone passing by. From the outside, it continued to present itself as it always had, composed orderly, untouched by disruption. But inside, the function had ended. Not abruptly, not with a single decisive break. Instead, the house had gradually lost the structure that once defined it, not the physical arrangement of rooms and routines, but the invisible alignment that had governed how people moved within it, how words were shaped, how silence was used. By the time Aubrey began to pack, there was nothing left to negotiate. She did not announce her departure. There was no conversation scheduled for it, no moment chosen to frame it as a decision that required acknowledgement. It had already been decided not in a single instance, but across a sequence of events that had removed any ambiguity about where she stood and what remained. She packed in the morning, not early, not late, at a time when the house was quiet enough to allow movement without interruption, but not so quiet that the act itself would feel concealed. She chose carefully what to take, not everything, only what was hers. Clothing arranged in neat folds, personal documents already organized and secured, a small box of items that held no financial value, but carried memory photographs, a notebook, a single piece of jewelry she had worn before the house had become something else. The rest she left. Not because it did not matter, because it did not belong to her in any way that required retention. The dining table was cleared. Not of documents, those had already been removed, stored, transferred into places that did not depend on proximity, but of presence. It returned to its original function, a surface, nothing more. Lucas watched from the hallway. He had not asked when she would leave. He had not asked if she would. But he had known. The knowledge had arrived slowly, settling into him in the same way everything else had over the past weeks, not through explanation, but through accumulation. He stood there as Aubrey closed the final box. "You're going," he said. The sentence was not a question. Aubrey looked up. "Yes." Lucas stepped into the room. Not fully, just enough to be present. "For how long?" he asked. Aubrey considered the question. Then, for good. Lucas nodded once. The movement was small, controlled. He looked at the floor, then back at her. "I didn't think it would end like this," he said. Aubrey held his gaze. It didn't start like this either. Lucas absorbed that. The sentence did not accuse. It did not excuse. It simply placed the sequence where it belonged. He shifted his weight. "Are you mad at me?" he asked. The question came quieter, less certain. Aubrey did not answer immediately. She looked at him, not as he had been at the dinner table, not as he had been in the hallway, but as he stood now without the structure that had once defined his position. "I'm clear about what happened," she said. Lucas's jaw tightened slightly. "That's not the same thing," "No," Aubrey agreed. "It's not." He nodded again. "Slower this time." "I told him," he said. "Everything, I know." Lucas looked at her surprised. How Aubrey's expression remained unchanged. "Because that's how this works now," she said. Lucas understood. Not fully, but enough. He stepped back, not retreating, making space. "Where will you go?" he asked. Aubrey lifted the box. "I have a place," she said. She did not elaborate. Lucas did not ask, because the details no longer belonged to him. Jonathan returned that afternoon, earlier than expected. Again, the pattern remained, though its purpose had changed. He entered the house and stopped almost immediately, not because something was visibly wrong, because something was missing. He moved into the dining room, saw the absence, the cleared table, the packed boxes, Aubrey standing beside them. He did not ask what she was doing. He already knew. "You're leaving," he said. Aubrey met his gaze. "Yes." Jonathan exhaled slowly, not sharply, not with frustration, with recognition. "This isn't necessary," he said. The sentence arrived out of habit more than conviction. Aubrey did not respond. Jonathan stepped further into the room. "We can still resolve this," he continued. "It doesn't have to." He stopped. Because the sentence no longer had a direction. Resolve what? The financial review. The documented pattern. The sequence already established, the language that had once allowed him to reposition events, now failed to find structure. Aubrey waited, not for explanation, for completion. Jonathan did not finish the thought. Instead, he shifted. "You're making a permanent decision based on a temporary situation," he said. Aubrey tilted her head slightly. "This wasn't temporary," she said. Jonathan held her gaze. "It could have been managed." Aubrey nodded once. "Yes," she said. "It was." The difference lay in the tense. Jonathan looked away first. The room held that shift. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. He turned back after a moment. "What do you want?" he asked. The question came without structure, without positioning. Aubrey answered simply, "Nothing from here." Jonathan absorbed that. His shoulders lowered slightly, not in defeat, in acknowledgement. Because for the first time, there was no negotiation left. No version he could offer that would realign the outcome. Aubrey picked up the box, moved toward the door. Lucas stepped aside as she passed. Jonathan remained where he stood. He did not follow. He did not stop her. He watched. Because that was all that remained. Outside, the air carried no indication that anything had changed. The same street, the same houses, the same quiet. Aubrey placed the box in her car, then returned once more for the last item, a folder. Not large, not heavy, but complete. She paused at the doorway, not looking back at the house, not lingering, just standing there for a moment between spaces. Then she stepped out, closed the door behind her. The sound was soft, final. Inside, the house remained. Jonathan stood in the dining room, Lucas in the hallway. Neither spoke, because there was nothing left to define, no narrative to establish, no structure to enforce, only the absence of what had once held everything in place. Aubrey started the car, pulled away from Alder Ridge Drive. The house receded in the rearview mirror. Not as something lost, not as something abandoned, as something completed. She did not accelerate. She did not hesitate. The road ahead was not dramatic, not marked by resolution in the way stories often demand. It was simply clear, and clarity after everything was enough. The story does not end where the house disappears from view. It lingers in what remains afterward, the quiet realization that strength does not always announce itself, that truth does not always arrive loudly, and that justice, when it comes, often does so without spectacle. Aubrey never raised her voice. She never demanded to be believed. She did not force the truth into the open. She recorded it, aligned it, allowed it to stand on its own. And in doing so, she changed the outcome, not by overpowering what stood against her, but by refusing to distort what was real. There are moments in life where silence is mistaken for weakness, where patience is mistaken for passivity, where restraint is misunderstood as a surrender. But sometimes silence is observation. Patience is preparation. And restraint is the clearest form of control. If you've ever seen something wrong and felt that speaking wouldn't change it, this story is not asking you to shout louder. It's asking you to look closer, to notice patterns, to trust sequence. Because truth, when it is carefully kept, does not disappear. It accumulates, and eventually it stands. If this story stayed with you, you can leave a quiet mark of your own, where you're watching from what time it is there, or simply what part felt most real to you. And if you value stories that don't rush the truth, that don't simplify what is complex, you're welcome to stay a little longer. There are more like this.